Woo!
Thank you. It's big today. Good afternoon to folks who are in the session. We cannot see you, but if you would put your name, where you're from, and why you chose this session in the chat, that would be great. And in the chat, you would use the session chat. There's an event chat and a session chat. So you'll click on session and use that chat. So we'll wait a couple minutes. Looks like there's quite a few. There's about 7 folks here so far. So we'll wait a couple more minutes. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Hi, Seth, based in Austin, Texas, Empower Schools. Great. We're excited to have you, Seth. See Haley, Delaware. Awesome. So someone who's looking to learn how to interact a little bit more with school boards. Hi, Tiffany from EdTrust in New York. All right. Folks are rolling in. We'll wait a couple more seconds. And again, if you are coming in, then we ask if you click on the session, make sure you're doing the chat in the session tab and not the event one. The event one's for the whole, everyone. So the session chat, if you would enter your name, where you're from, and why you chose a session. So I see folks from Michigan. We have Houston in the house. A lot of my friends are from there. We have Texas. Good afternoon, everyone. All right, we will give a couple more minutes. I still see that number going up, so I'll give a couple more minutes for folks to get settled. You know, this is the first breakout, and so it's probably slightly confusing. I'm Marissa, I'm the one speaking, and there is a box that is the PowerPoint that I'll be using. And so the way to make the PowerPoint larger is to double click. So hover your mouse over the PowerPoint and double click it, it'll make it bigger so you'll be able to see it. All right, we got some Louisiana folks, North Carolina, Kentucky, all right, Fort Worth. Did I miss any states? Oh, I see Maryland. All right, so folks, keep your thoughts rolling in, and I'm gonna go ahead and get started. I know we're slightly behind, and so we'll try to make up a little bit of time here. So thank you everyone for being here. We are so excited. So let me start with introductions. Ooh. All right, so my name is Marissa Alberti. I'm here with the big hair. I'm originally from Oklahoma, but am currently, sorry, I'm looking at the chat while I'm talking. Originally from Oklahoma, but currently working in our national offices in Washington, D.C. as a doctoral resident. So I'm actually finishing up my doctorate. I'm excited to moderate this session. I'm here with 2 of my colleagues. The first is Tramel Howard. He works out of our Louisiana offices, and they, due to weather and many things, are having some tech issues today. So he will be here definitely on audio and hopefully on video by the time this session is over. Tramel also is the vice president of the East Baton Rouge Parish School Board. So he comes to us both with expertise from the advocacy policy side, as well as from a school board experience. With him, Trammell brought along two amazing community advocates, also from Louisiana, Crystalline Lyles and Kristen Smith. Crystalline is a community advocate. She's also the founder of a new community organization called The Vision. Hopefully she'll be able to tell you about it. And then Kristen Smith, who is the Director of Leadership for Education Equity in Louisiana and the co-founder of the South Louisiana Coalition for Education. And then my next colleague to introduce is Jeannie Pupo Walker. She's our state director from Tennessee. And she is also a school board member for the Metro Nashville Public Schools. So we are so excited to talk to you today about our experiences. And just as a reminder, if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and we will try to answer them. And once we get to the Q&A portion, if you request to share your audio and video, we will try to let you be able to show your video in person. All right, so we will keep it moving. Hi, everyone. So hopefully I saw a bunch of you shared why you came to this session, and hopefully these objectives meet your expectations. So the purpose of this session is really for you all to get a deeper understanding of how school boards operate and opportunities for advocacy. So now more than ever, we're in a pandemic. We're in many pandemics, arguably, around race, around health, around economics. And so today, we're thinking about how throughout this COVID-19 world that we're living in, the responsibility and decision-making is hyper-localized at the moment. So there's a lot of decisions that school boards, that superintendents, that advocates are pushing for. And so we wanted to give some tips around what it is you can actually do. And so hopefully you'll build a bit of a personal toolkit for practices. And then you'll also learn from our community members and staff who are here to share with you about their own experiences. So we'll do a little case study. So we're going to start off with a little game, just to get our juices flowing and to help us kind of understand really what are school boards and what do they do. So true or false, and type your responses in the chat. True or false, school boards pass policy. True or false, school boards pass policy. See a couple trues, one false, a couple trues. So the answer is true. School boards do pass the policies for the district. That is a main component of being on a school board. What about manage principals? True or false? Do school boards manage principals? False, no, false, false. Yep, the answer is false. School boards do not manage the principals. That's actually the job of the district, the superintendent, to manage and train principals. What about approving contracts? Do school boards approve contracts? I'm seeing mostly trues, and that is correct. School boards do approve the contract. So they're signing off the policies, they're approving the contracts, etc. What about hire, evaluate, and fire superintendents? Yep, that is one of a main component of school boards. They hire, evaluate, and fire superintendents. I know from my hometown, there were definitely many superintendents that cycled through in the time that I lived. What about provide training for district staff? Professional development for teachers? No, yes. Mostly falses and some question marks. So school boards are not responsible for providing the training. That's actually, again, on the district side, the superintendent who oversees the professional development for staff. We're going to go quickly through these last ones just to save some time. Passing budgets, that is true. So passing policy, passing budgets, anything that is governance related, passing kind of the laws of the district, that is school boards. Selecting textbooks and curriculums. So I see some falses, some yes. So this one's a little bit tricky. So the school board would sign the contract to finalize the curriculum that's being used. So that would be the contract, but they wouldn't actually be the ones to select it. Ones who to select it, that would be more on the district leadership side. Evaluating teachers, this is also a false, that is again on the superintendent, school board leadership, school leadership side. So hopefully, I know there's definitely some nuances and some exceptions to some of these that we could definitely get into, but hopefully you all have a better understanding of in thinking about what do school boards actually do. So if you think about it, school boards are the ones that, okay, we're going to set the laws, we're going to set the policy, we are going to govern over this school board. And then the superintendent, as well as those in administration and the cabinets at the district, are the ones managing and implementing and making the things happen, training staff, etc. And so hopefully that gave you a better picture of the role of school boards and how they support the district. So I'm going to pause there. Does anybody have any immediate questions? All right, trying to leave time in case there's a delay. Who is above the board? That's a really good question. I would love to let Olivia, great question. Tiffany, thank you, the voters. So the boards are elected officials. And so if we think about
You're muted, Marissa.
Okay, so basically I was saying voters, go out and vote. Board members and who I want to see there. And so that actually is one way that you can really advocate and push for school boards to change is actually either running for yourself or running campaigns for those that you want on the school board and holding them accountable. All right. And we have some folks in the chat that have some expertise as well. So thank you for sharing that as well. So Jeannie, Trammell, and myself were thinking about, given our own experiences, I come from Oklahoma City and I've worked in a nonprofit that did a lot of advocacy work, and I worked with families and communities and did community engagement. So I did advocacy for the school board in Oklahoma City. So I'm coming at it more as an advocate side. And Jeannie and Trammell, who is currently not on, both are board members themselves. And so they have that experience. So we came up with top 10 best practices for working with school boards. So this is if you're thinking about, okay, I want to advocate for the school uniform, the dress code that I know that the school board approves, I want to advocate for something to be changed. How would I go about that? What are the best practices that I can use? So I'm going to keep with the example of the dress code. I'm going to share these best practices. The list is definitely not exhaustive. I think you could think of other things. And so these are based on our experiences. So the first one is understand your power. We shared that we vote for our school board members. That is a huge. And so how do you actually leverage the collective impact that you might have to actually elect school board members that you can work with, but also be able to hold them accountable? Understanding how do things move through boards? How does a policy go from something that is talked about to something that's actually put into a policy for the school district? What are the openings? One example might be if you know when the budget is passed for your school board, for your school district. So what are the different checkpoints that school board members have to pass this budget, and when might be a good time for you to advocate for a change you want to see in the budget? The second best practice is do your research. So this is kind of similar, but who is your board member? Is that board member in charge? Are they elected at large, which means they kind of have that responsibility to oversee the entire district, or are they responsible for certain pockets of students? Who is the chair of the board? Are there any different political dynamics on the board? Who are board members personally? What are the things that they're passionate about that you might be able to tap into? Who has the power to make decisions, and what might be some historical context that you can consider? So, for example, like I said, in Oklahoma City, I know an important piece of historical context is that in the past 10 years, there's been 5 to 6 superintendents. And so that's something I would want to keep in mind as I'm thinking about advocating to the school board and what they're potentially dealing with. The last one I'm going to share is establish and maximize relationships and partnerships. So there's power in the people and in the community. So community partnerships, two groups that maybe are in theory do different things, but they agree on a certain issue can come together, and that'll create a lot of power and strength in numbers. One example of that we've seen is in Montgomery County in Maryland. I don't know if anybody in the audience is from there, but we had, there's a group of folks with identity that does support with Latinx students, and then another group of folks who are doing NAACP work. And so they came together and formed the Black and Brown Coalition, and they're advocating together for change at the district level in Montgomery County. And so those are the first three, and I'm going to pass it off to Jeannie to share the next 4 with you.
Thank you, Marissa, and welcome everybody to the school board session. My name is Jeannie Pupil-Walker, and I run the Education Trust Office in Tennessee, and I also serve on the school board in Nashville. And I'm going into my 3rd year now, and it's one of the most challenging experiences I've ever had in this COVID era. So you've got to show some love to your school board members who are trying to figure it out as we kind of move through this pandemic and figure out what's best for kids. So I will talk about the next 4 top 10 practices. So the next one is around communication, and communication is an essential strategy for any advocate working with school boards. And so one of the things I'll say is every school board member communicates with the community differently. Some really use Facebook, some are on Twitter, some prefer email. And so you really need to figure out how that school board member shows up in the public domain. For me, Facebook is not a place where I engage for the most part with constituents. I do a lot of activity on Twitter, and you can follow me on Twitter at Jeannie Pupo, but I also prefer email. And I will tell you that if you want to get a substantive message to a school board member, a question or an issue, I think email can be the best way to do it. Often school board members have trouble with, I will speak for myself. I will say it is hard for me to engage with constituents who are challenging me openly on Facebook in the public domain and really trying to shame or embarrass or criticize. It's much harder for me to want to engage in a constructive conversation if there's sort of a hostile sort of approach in social media. So if you have a really serious conversation you want to have with a school member, I suggest starting with email. You can also phone board members, but that too sometimes is tricky to get in touch with them. I will also say on communication that speaking publicly at school board meetings is really important. Showing up at events where school board members are going to be is also a great way to talk to them in person. And so that one-to-one sort of communication, I think, is always best. So I will move to the next one, Marissa, which is sort of taking the short and long-term view. And so if you want to really create meaningful change in your community via advocacy at the school board level, have short-term goals and long-term goals. And so, and then if you have some short-term wins, it builds credibility for your own work, but it also helps that school board member feel like they are making incremental goals, having those met. And you can feel like you're working together towards something. So really important to think about what is it you can accomplish in the near term that gives that school board member some credibility and helps you guys work together. And then what is the long-term change you're seeking? So for example, if you're looking to, I'll just give an example, get rid of police, school resource officers in your schools, that's not something you're going to get to happen overnight, but maybe the place to start is a short-term goal of let's talk about how many school resource officers are, how much does it cost the district to have them, what is the rate of sort of arrests and involvement of school resource officers, and once you have that data publicly, what would be your short-term win, then you can engage on a longer-term goal of addressing school resource officers in buildings. My sixth one is around being persistent. And so this is one where you can't be an in and out kind of advocate. If you are an advocate that's pressing hard on something and then you disappear, the school board member is not going to take you very seriously. And so if you are persistent, showing up to meetings, showing up to community events, staying in touch on what is happening with your issue, the school board member will take you a lot more seriously. I also think you can use school board campaign season to your advantage. And so being persistent when there are school board races and holding forums, challenging school members to take a position to support your issue publicly is an important tool. I've seen students do that really well, where they hold forums for school board members and ask them to commit to a set of principles that the students have put out there. And so that kind of persistence when they're candidates and then holding them accountable when they're actually elected is really, really important. And then my seventh one is around knowing how to use media. And so this is, and I use this as press, but also social media. And so if you're an advocate that has the ability to produce op-eds or create content out in the media in that way, I think that's really effective. It gives you a lot of credibility. It gives you a wider audience for your issue, and it forces the school member to pay attention to that op-ed. And then I think on social media, knowing how to leverage all the different tools that are out there and engaging in a constructive conversation with your school board member. And the last thing I'll say about this is one of the most important ways to, I think we know this as advocates in general, to really get your message across is through the use of students and student voice. And I'll talk about a case study in a little bit, one of the most important, most effective voices that you can have speaking to school board members and sort of the public participation section of meetings is when students tell their stories and connect it to the policy they want to see changed. So preparing and equipping students to do that is a really important way. And parents are another really effective sort of advocacy strategy, engaging parents and allowing them to also tell their story in connection to your issue. So I will leave it there.
Thank you, Jeannie. Sorry about all of the technical problems that we're having here in Louisiana, but it's great to be with you guys and share from my experience as a school board member, some of the things that I believe are best practices as we, how do advocates navigate with elected officials, specifically school board members. So I'll start with our number 8 best practice and having a measurable goal. I can't tell you how many times people have come to me with different problems, and they don't really have a way to measure how do you hold people accountable for a specific goal. So I will always encourage advocates to be very intentional and specific of see accomplished. So measure that, present a specific amount to work done as a navigating it. There are so many problems on a day-to-day basis to that. So for our board, it takes 5 votes. And so in order to, may not that you're facing. But if we're going into the conversations with the idea that we want to reach a solution, I think that it becomes very and being successful in really. And then the last piece is we see now in our current state at a federal collaboration across the aisle is literally a life or death situation for a lot of people. I'm a sitting Democrat on the board, but I have 5 Republican board members. So if I ever want to get anything done on our board, I have to be able to collaborate across the aisle and talk to people who sometimes don't necessarily agree with me in all cases. And so being able to do that as an advocate is key. I've had a lot of experience with advocates that are very one-track minded sometimes. And so like they're only thinking about what their priority is and not really taking in consideration like others' priorities. So being able to just have diverse conversations with people who sometimes just totally disagree with you and trying to figure out a way to like really
Thank you so much, Melody. So instead of us just telling things, we're going to do a little practice. So I hope.
Marissa, you sound really
Can
garbled.
you hear me?
We can hear you. It just sounds like a robot.
Ooh. See if I can fix that. Is it better?
No. Do you want me to do the narration for this part?
Sure.
My part?
Sure.
Okay. So we have, the 3 of us got together and decided it might be interesting to share some case studies on real life examples of how community-based organizations made a difference in terms of getting some policy passed and getting things accomplished in the advocacy space with school board members. And so I will go first, Marissa, and share sort of my case study for Nashville. If you want to forward the slide. Here we go. So I will share with you a story about a group called NOAA in Nashville. They're called Nashville Organized for Action and Hope. And they are a faith-led coalition of multiracial, interdenominational with a lot of churches across the city, as well as labor unions. And they have really mobilized, sometimes convened up to 400, 500, 600 people at a time for community forums. And so they have different committees that work on things. And they have an education committee that is
Marissa?
Working very, hey, Tramel, were you trying to say something? Sorry.
Can you hear me, Marissa?
Yeah, Tramel, we can hear you. Sorry, guys. So NOAA has decided to take on sort of issues of school discipline, racial justice, and restorative justice in our public school system in Nashville. So what they decided to do was launch a long-term campaign to try to change a bunch of our policies.
Marissa, I think you can hear me. I think the next portion of our presentation was to go into the case study from Jeannie. Jeannie is the sitting school board member for Metro Nashville Public Schools. Jeannie, if you're able to hear us, we can go straight into your presentation and case study.
Can you not hear me? Can you guys hear me?
Jeannie?
Wow.
Oh, they can hear Jeannie.
You guys can't hear me? Oh, you can hear me. This is crazy. Okay, so the audience can hear me. Tramel, you can't hear me. Sorry, guys. Okay, I'm going to keep going. Judy Frudenthal's on here. She's in NOAA. That's a good thing. I'm telling the NOAA story, Judy. So anyway, so NOAA decided to push for some serious changes to our student handbook on the discipline policies that we have. And so the way that they went about doing that was basically showing up at each school board meeting when we had public participation, having students speak, advocates speak, tell their stories about discipline, about expulsion, about suspension, and they brought the data with them. So they prepared information for us to share with us on discipline rates by race, by disability, and they really brought solutions as well, wanted to see us implement and fund restorative practices, and having staff that dealt with, were trained in restorative practices. And so we had the NOAA folks coming into committee meetings, coming into board meetings, holding forums, holding election season forums. And so at the end of the day, they were able to push to get some changes, probably not all the changes that they wanted, but they were able to get some changes on getting elementary school students to not be suspended, arrested, or expelled, which was an important step forward. And I'll be honest with you, we had staff that really were struggling with that because there were a lot of elementary schools that didn't feel like they had a system in place to support elementary school students when there were behavior issues. But I think it forced, the NOAA advocacy forced Nashville School Board to take a hard look at our practices with elementary students, and then begin to put together a budget to support elementary schools, to support students, and to hire staff to support elementary school students. And so we have quite a ways to go on that. We're really struggling with our budget, like most districts in the country right now. But our elementary school, I would say our practices are improving simply by virtue of NOAA pushing us to really think hard about what we want to see true for elementary students. And so I think, the example that the takeaway here for all of you is a group like NOAA that is diverse and represents faith communities, civil rights communities, labor communities, labor organizations together collectively, and in sheer numbers, they were able to really keep this issue alive and on the table for many, many months until they got to a place where they got a solution. And so I'm happy to take any questions about that, but I think that sort of advocacy is what it's going to take in a large urban district like Nashville. So, all right, so our technology life is better. Is it better now?
I think so. Can you all hear me now?
You sound great. Okay.
Great. All right, so I would folks in the chat, what are some things you notice about Jeannie's story and what pops out to you, especially in regards to the top 10 best practices or just questions in general? And you can choose to on video if you're brave and want to show your face, or you can write your questions in the chat. I'll wait a little while since I know there's a delay. Yep, so we have Olivia, thank you for sharing and just sharing that transparency and being vulnerable around thinking about how to really understand and then exercise the power that you have. And then we have a question from Deirdre. How did the group decide on what particular issue to focus on?
Well, so I want to be clear, it wasn't my group. This was a community group that came to me as a school board member advocating, or came to the entire school board advocating around student discipline policy. And so the interesting thing about their approach is it's relatively inclusive in terms of anybody can attend NOAA events, anyone can learn from them, but they have an agenda and they're not playing around and they keep pushing. And so that kind of accountability for the board in sheer numbers and just showing up is really what it takes. And so I think for them, they have a racial justice agenda writ large. They care about criminal justice issues in the city. And so I think it was a natural fit for them to look into disproportionate discipline issues in Nashville.
All right, so we will have another opportunity to ask Jeannie if you have more questions, but I want to go ahead and go to our second case study where we will do something similar. As you're listening, think about these top 10 tips as well as any questions. So for our next group, Louisiana folks, and I know technology's a little iffy, but it looks like we got Tramel back. So Tramel is a board member for the East Baton Rouge Parish School System. He's actually the vice president of the board. He has with him Kristen Smith, who, like we shared earlier, is a community advocate. And then hopefully our other community advocate, Crystalline, will also be joining us very shortly. So I'm going to kick it off to them, and they're going to share a little bit about the experience, Tramel from the board side and Kristen from the community side. So I'll put myself on mute and hand it off to Tramel and Kristen.
Thank you, Marissa. And again, technology is really winning today. But yeah, so one of the most important decisions that we as a board, are really one of our priority or top jobs as a school board, is to hire a superintendent. And so our case study will deal with like that level of advocate and board member engagement related to our superintendent. So as a board member, one of the things that I advocated for from the very beginning, when we knew that we were going to have to go into a new superintendent search, was to really figure out how can we be as transparent as possible in the process, because our community has been crying out for like transparency, and like as we select and decide who is going to be the leader of our school district. We are the second largest school district in the state of Louisiana, and over time there has been a great level of distrust from members in our community related to how the board comes through and makes decisions. And so as we were having this process, some of my fellow board members were not as on board with having a very transparent process. So as a board member, I had to figure out ways to make a community-wide transparent process that kind of like almost went around my board, because they were not really open to having a very transparent process. So I knew of this community group called SLICE, which stands for South Louisiana Coalition for Education. And so I wanted to, get them on board and keep them in the know about what was happening with our process, and then giving them a chance to elevate their own story and their own organization, and helping bring this transparency within our community. And so we did a few things with our superintendent process with this organization. So as a board member, it's always good to have like advocates who are your friend in the work. Because there are so many things that happen, and sometimes you're making decisions and you're on the island by yourself. So having quality advocates that like you've built relationships with to be friends in the work, it goes a long way. Those moments where you need people to come testify at the dais about like, whatever issue you're dealing with, are those moments where you're having a really controversial issue and you need people to stand with you when you sometimes don't have other board members to stand with you. So it was just a very pleasant experience. And side note, for Louisiana, Baton Rouge specifically, we're actually getting ready to go back through this process because our superintendent had a sudden departure. And so now we are without another leader. And so we are continuing our process related to finding a quality leader to really transform and lead our district to where we know that it can be for students. So I'll turn it over to Kristen to kind of share with you the advocate side of it, and then take any questions as we go along.
Thanks, Tramel. Louisiana Coalition for Education. And once we realized that we had the opportunity to get a new superintendent for East Baton Rouge Parish Schools, we launched an equity-minded superintendent search campaign, because, of course, we believe and really understand the importance of having leaders that have an equity lens. Far too often, many leaders are still talking about equality without realizing that in order to get equality, you have to implement equitable policies and practices. So we attended every community listening session that the search firm that the board hired would gather community members and stakeholders together to gather input for the new superintendent search hiring profile. One thing that we noticed once we released a survey amongst our own membership base is that our members really wanted equity to be the number one priority. And so when the search firm presented before the board the hiring profile in its draft form, there was no mention of equity. So we had leaders like Sierra Hart, Christopher Lewis, who are educators in the classroom, actually testify before the board and demand that equity language was included. Because for us, if we're not intentional with the hiring process, it is too much work on the back end to get leaders to understand why equity is important. And so from there, with support from members like Dadrius Lannis, who's not here today, and Shamel, we were able to get that small win, and that was leveraged and included in our local papers. We also, as Shamel mentioned, we also had finalists that we want to make sure that the community members knew if these leaders were aligned with our issues. And so we released equity report cards. And can you hear me? Oh, I'm sorry, JG. So we released these equity score report cards and shared that with the community. And we basically gave every finalist a grade. From there were 2 finalists that were selected. And I'll be honest, our number 1 choice was not selected. And we were given someone else, but she recently resigned after 2 months on the job. So therefore, we will be back before the school board. I will be pushing my friend and colleague, Jamel Howard, to go back and find us a permanent equity-minded superintendent. And so what I'm telling other advocates is that organizing is chaotic. And sometimes you think you have a win, but you have to stay consistent and have some continuity, because in order to get what we need for students and families in East Baton Rouge, we can't let up. So we'll be there tomorrow speaking before the board and making sure that we finally get a permanent leader for East Baton Rouge Parish. There's a lot more I can share. If Crystalline is here with us, she can kind of share more about the parent organizing angle, or I can share more in detail in the question and answer.
Yes, thank you so much, Kristen, for sharing that work, and welcome, Crystalline. And like I said earlier, like, as you know, there's just so many components of being a board member, but like our primary responsibility is to hire and fire superintendents and pass a yearly or annual budget. And so, Crystalline, if you would just kind of share like what's your experience been like, and if you had any advice to other advocates who are looking to have or build positive work.
Yeah, so again, I'm Crystal and Miles. I just want to share the huge importance um, that we have as a community to understand the roles of our school board members, the roles that we have as a community, and to be able to use our voice in a very efficient and effective way. During intended search, I think that our school board was very transparent. We had multiple opportunities to show up for community meetings, to be involved in silos if we're working with organizations on the side, and both as community shareholders. Um, Unfortunately, the turnouts were kind of low at those community meetings, but those are perfect opportunities for us as a community to show up in groves and to express our concerns and needs of our children from community to community, because it's different. It's in a vast variety. Another way that we could be more effective. We had the opportunity to go to school board meetings and also to log in. Our district made it possible, accessible for us to log in to school board meetings, and we were able to have chats and to post questions. And so I thought that the board did an amazing job um, including or pulling in and valuing the concerns that were expressed by our community. I think that we also need to understand that waiting until the last minute, waiting until the night to vote to show up in droves, is not as effective as being consistently communicating with your representatives, consistently expressing concerns, as well as suggested um, suggested solutions. Um, Also, being aware of the candidates. Our school board members did an excellent job of being extremely transparent about the candidates that were interested in our superintendent position. They posted the interviews. We had access to do some diving and some research for each candidate of our own. Those were all privileges and benefits that community shareholders of other districts may not get a chance to do. So I am saying that one of the powers that we need to use is research. We don't need to wait to be told what we need to know about the people that are interested in being leaders within our district. We need to do our homework. We need to ask if we don't have enough information. We need to show up to any and everything that we can via web, Zoom, virtual, however, or in person. And we need to keep open communication and dialogue with the members that we elect to be in these seats. Leadership is only as well as the communication lines between the people that they serve, between the constituents. And so we need to do a better job as a community staying abreast on the issues and the people that are seeking leadership positions in our communities.
Thank you so much, Crystalline, for sharing, and thank you, Kristen, and thank you guys for hearing, the EBR story. There's so many different case studies that we could go into, as our board has made national news over the last few months for not always the most positive things, but it just shows the importance of truly being persistent in your advocacy and just having these measurable goals and being solutions oriented. And the last thing about collaborating across the aisle, one of the things that Slice did throughout this process is they invited myself and a Republican board member to have a town hall together and listen to the concerns of the constituency. So you had two people on two separate sides of the aisle listening to the same constituent concerns and coming together with some real life solutions to help us get an equity-minded superintendent. So I'm hoping and praying that tomorrow goes well, and so we can continue to push the importance of equity and the importance of advocacy. But it all starts with just being transparent and having quality community advocates in your corner. So with that, Marissa, we'll turn it back over to you to close us out.
Yes, always so little time. We did have a question. We'll take maybe one or two questions because I do want to give that opportunity. Jametta said, have any of your policy work with parents included advancing equitable funding? And if yes, what was that experience or process like? And I know Jeannie put an answer in the chat, and if folks from Louisiana want to respond to that as well.
So actually, that is one of our biggest policy pushes that's on the docket right now. Crystalline and I have a conversation daily about funding and where there really is the true measure of change. And so Crystalline is a parent, but she also was once a district instructional specialist for our school district. And so she's seen how funding plays a true role in getting resources to schools on the ground. And so, again, when you start talking about equitable funding inside of schools for a board that can be swayed either way, that's sometimes a difficult conversation, but it is something that we as a community, myself as a board member, are working with fellow stakeholders and advocates to become a major push in our next, with our next leader, because our last leader, that's what we were working towards. Again, we get an equity-minded superintendent who is understand the importance of equitable funding across the board to really get to changing outcomes for students inside of our schools.
Thank you all. Any last questions before we close out? Okay. All right, so the last thing as we close out is just a quick reflection for you all. You don't have to answer all of these questions, but pick one of these questions and answer it in the chat. So question 1, what are your major takeaways? Or question 2, what is a commitment you can make next week based off what you learned today? Or you can answer question 3, what are other tools you might need to more effectively advocate to school board members? So pick one of these questions, put your response in the chat. Yep, I see engagement with multiple stakeholders. So it sometimes can mean city council, legislators, business, not just the school board. Jeannie's encouraging folks to run for the school board. Any other thoughts as we close out?
A thumbs up, Jeannie. Suggestion I am a parent and an educator, and I did decide to run for the school board. And with that experience, learned a whole lot more of how we as community members can be a more powerful entity in the policy side, whether we're sitting in the seats or not. So I would highly encourage community members to look into that.
Yep. And I see some other reflections now. I think the delay we're now seeing them. So we see consistency is key. Encouraging people, someone said that they're going to encourage the board to send the report time to the board. Building partnerships is really important. Folks saying they want to do more research, working on building relationships, and really just building the power and leveraging the voices of their parents, parent leaders. Really wonderful. Thank you all. This was a wonderful conversation, and we know it was probably too quick, but given the virtual environment, we know that attention spans can be low. And as a reminder, this is a recorded session, and so you will have the opportunity to go back and review any of the things we talked about if you'd like. So a closeout question is just a challenge for you today, tomorrow. Find out who is your school board member. If you don't know, look it up. Who are your school board members and what are they working on? That's a really good first step you can take just to really start to do your research and understand. So again, I want to thank the participants for being here. They have given me permission to share their email information. If you would like to follow up with any of us, we are happy to keep the conversation going with you all, and we thank you so much for being here. The next thing on the docket for the conference is state time. If you are not attending a state time, then you just get a break until we come back at 4 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Central. But if you are going to state time, you can go to those mostly Zoom links now. And if you need support, you can always go back to the reception area and ask questions, and we'll help support to get you where you are. Thank you, everyone, so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Enjoy the rest of your week.
Thanks, Marissa. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So bye, guys.